They say that knowledge is power, and they say that the pen is mightier than the sword. So who is they? Doesn't matter. They is dead. Welcome to Blanket of Shadows. Anne mixed herbs and fruit into spring water and then poured each of them in a glass. I escaped one prison just to end up here, she said. There's never been a difficult situation I couldn't escape. Except this island. This beautiful, terrible island. Mikey swirled the concoction in his glass and took a sip. It had smelled overly earthy, but it tasted much better than he expected. So then, what hope do I have, really? He asked. You've already altered the course of the island, she replied, so anything is possible. But this next task has to go right. You have to put out a lamp that's been burning for hundreds of years. Mikey took another sip and felt his body perk up a bit. It's got some kick, huh? Anne asked. You'll need it. And let me tell you why I have at least a little bit of hope for you. When the God of Knowledge was installed, it was a beautiful evening at sunset. No clouds in the sky, and the sun was burning through a rainbow of fiery tones over the ocean. The ceremony was at the village library, which was at an isolated building in the back end of the top hill near the meager huts of the subjects. From the library windows, the whole island was visible. The king had offered the god a room in the castle, but the God of Knowledge wanted the highest peak of the island because he couldn't stand the idea of something happening without him knowing. And instead of a house, he built a library and put a small bed in the corner. He filled the shelves with books, pictures, and ink. At the ceremony, which was before the enchantress was killed, the wizard handed the God of Knowledge an oil lamp to symbolize the flame of knowledge. It was an unassuming metal contraption that was used on the trip over, but it became extraordinary. The wizard whispered a few words and clapped, and the lamp lit with orange-flamed gasps from the crowd. And then the sky changed, as if the lamp had stolen the fire directly from the heavens. Clouds formed in a ring around the island, blocking the view of the sunset. The winds picked up. Lightning flashed in the skies around them. The waters around them churned. Birds took flight and scattered. The king soaked it all in, mistaking the fulfillment of his sword-tipped commands as divine providence. He was drunk on power that wasn't even his. The God of Knowledge was originally a monk who studied religious works and perfected his letterings and drawings in an abbey. However, he dipped into the mead as much as the inkwell, and, even worse in the eyes of the abbot, began studying secular topics, especially science. He sketched wildlife, studied dreamers like Da Vinci, drew out the new theorems of Sir Isaac Newton, and took copious notes on surgeries and executions with scientific detachment as others sickened and looked away. His thirst for knowledge of this world was heretical and dangerous. He stopped thinking about virtue, about what should be, and only cared about what is. This got him kicked out of the church. So when the king approached him about leaving on an expedition and documenting the ordeal, the monk went along with it. He didn't have any faith that the expedition would be successful, but in his nihilistic search of knowledge, he thought it would at least make a good story and he would be there for the disaster. He'd die writing the morbid details of his own death in blood if he had to. There is always a trade-off in magic, and the trade-off for the god's knowledge of the island was isolation. No humans could find or escape the island on their own. The strongest ships, the best sailors, and even the new flying contraptions, they were all no match for the protection of the island. The more the god learned about the island, the less the inhabitants remembered about the outside world. But every now and then, a stranger would show up. And so, Anne continued, if you're here, it's because the island wanted you to be here, and that gives me hope. The god of knowledge had several open windows and stayed up late writing by moonlight and the light of his lamp. He would have served as the island's lighthouse if the island were visible. Mikey thought of the light he'd seen. When I was in the water, he said, I think I saw it. I saw that light. It's what I swam towards. Moth, meet flame, Anne said. The god was insanely jealous of the wizard and the enchantress. The enchantress could speak in languages he couldn't fathom. She could speak to nature, to the island, to spirits, to other dimensions. She was a conduit in a way he could never imagine because he didn't have her gift. The wizard was as much of a mad scientist as he was a wizard. He could see the magical connections between seemingly ordinary things. Moon cycles, tides, crop patterns, migrations, the simple leaves and twigs that became powerful potions. So when something unexpected showed up on the shore that the wizard and enchantress didn't know about, the god of knowledge pinned his precious little butterfly for dissection. I know a secret way into the library, Anne said, and sighed. Because I put it there. After listening to Anne's story, Mikey wasn't sure if he was inspired to take down the creeps or if he should just give up now and take his chance with the sharks. But up the steps he went again, and to the back of the island, following the soft orange glow of a flame that had been lit for hundreds of years. The flame had led him to the island and might be leading him to his death. Anne's story had some gaps, like where she had come from, but they hadn't had the time for those details. She had washed ashore, barely clinging to life like he had, except she wasn't rescued by a kind spirit. She was captured by the god of knowledge and woke up a prisoner. The god of knowledge had dropped a cloak on her and taken her limp body up to his library, nodding when asked if he'd found an animal to dissect. He had abandoned his role as a monk, but not his vow of silence. After so many years of not speaking, he didn't see the point. The less interaction, the better. And he would have actually dissected her if he'd had the chance. He kept her in the library at the very back, behind the last bookshelf, which had a secret passageway and formed a hidden room. He gave her enough water and bread to keep her alive, and at night when the village was asleep, he would take the lamp back to the secret room and draw her. She could feel his calculating eyes on her skin as he cataloged every inch of her. Hairs, moles, veins, scars, teeth. She would have to hold still for hours as he drew, and never said a word. Once he felt like he could see everything he needed from the outside, he started pressing around on her skin, feeling her organs, her heart, her bones. And that's when Anne said she'd started digging an escape tunnel at the back of the library, chipping around some of the rocks that were a bit loose at the base. She was finished and pushing the loose stones out, making a hole large enough to crawl through when the god discovered her and flew into a rage. That's how she knew there was an entry at the library at the rear. What she hadn't told Mikey was how the library had turned into a prison. That was a story for later. There were metal rods and boards all around it in such a way that it didn't seem a human with limited resources could accomplish. There was enough space for light to pass through, but not a human. Mikey could see the god writing by the moonlight in the flame, what seemed to be gibberish. The god had lost his mind from years of imprisonment, and the walls and the floor and even himself were covered in ink, some of it legible. The god looked up and around, staring out all the cracks in the windows, suspicious. Mikey hid behind a rock and waited until he could hear the god back at his desk scribbling. Mikey crept back around the library and found the hole. There were 2 metal hooks with a strong rod through them, holding in place a thick panel covering the entrance. Carefully, he lifted the rod. It scraped the panel just a bit, but he stopped and waited and heard nothing. Assuming he was safe, he set the rod aside and pulled back the metal panel. It had been in place for years, but it came off with some might. Mikey silently took a few breaths to calm himself and then peeked inside. It was nearly pitch black except for a few slivers of light coming through the bookshelf. He crept back to the window and looked through, seeing the god still at his desk, writing. It's just some nerd monk, he told himself. I can take him. He crawled through the hole as silently as he could, holding on to the rod, and stood up in the room, ready for action. He could see Anne's bucket still in the corner, and sketches of every inch of her skin all around the room. It was a horrible place to be for a few minutes, much less trapped for days. Drawing on the rage for what this man had done to Anne, he barreled the revolving bookshelf and turned through it just like she said it would. He held up the rod to strike the god, but the god was nowhere to be found. Heart pounding, Mikey looked around. There was no trace of him, just the writings of an insane person. He saw the lamp sitting on the desk, so he reached to pick it up but heard a rustle above him. He looked up to find the god stretched between two beams, ready to pounce. For a moment, the god of knowledge took in his visitor, tilting his head like some of the animal predators he had studied. And then he dropped. When the god had attacked Anne years earlier, it was out of jealousy, the one emotion he seemed capable of. He had no positive emotional attachment to any person, even Anne with whom he had spent so much time, most of it in silence. He was about to dissect her without hesitation, but the thought of her leaving triggered in him a level of rage he hadn't felt before. The loss of control felt like violence to a god like him, even though he was the one committing the violence. Help, Anne had screamed. Somebody please save me. Like Mikey, she had just wanted to find a soft place to land, leaving a troubled situation, and like Mikey, she had somehow ended up here instead. Anne had thought that the god of knowledge would end her, but an old man yelled stop with so much force that it felt like the wind blew through the library, shuffling the god's papers. The god growled at the man and then set about getting his library straight again, once again choosing papers over people. The old man, who she came to know as the wizard, escorted the woman down the side of the hill to a small cottage on the beach, helping her walk on weak legs. He draped a cloak around her so she had some dignity and some cover from the gawkers. The rescue of the woman from the god cemented the fear and distrust of the monk god, and he became even more of a hermit. If anyone else had captured a woman, they would have been ended by the sword of purity, but gods don't get justice like mere humans do. Down on the beach, the wizard nursed Anne back to health. One day the king stopped by the beach hut with the god of justice as a show of strength. The wizard thought they were coming to check on the new resident or apologize for the god of knowledge, or, even worse, take her back, but instead the king just banned magicians from inside the stone walls without direct permission. Anne had never trusted authority, and her brutal interactions with the king and the gods of the island only made it worse. I've been in a lot of awful places in my life, she had told the wizard, but this might be the worst. I don't know how you think this is okay. I don't, the wizard answered, but I'm worried how bad it will get if I leave. If I could leave. I fear that there is only one escape from this island for me, and you saw the heft of its blade. Over the next year, the wizard spent his days teaching Anne the ways of the island, sharing his knowledge freely with her and treating her as his own. He had never had a daughter, and she had never had a father, but they guessed this was pretty close. Sometimes the god of knowledge tried to spy on them, jealous that someone else was getting the secrets of the island that had eluded him. The wizard explained crop patterns, moon cycles, tidal patterns, herb combinations, potions, and how to deal with idiots in authority. He had never had a child of his own, so he taught her with the passion of a father, pushing her to understand in case someday she should keep on with some of his work. He drew diagrams so she could remember and started making an almanac of sorts. But I'm not an enchantress, she had protested. Everyone has the potential for some kind of magic, he had replied. We just have to find it. The island brought you here for a reason. So far, Anne had been held captive, tortured, and now made to feel like she would never live up to the high expectations. When Mikey showed up, Anne had told him that she understood his fears and hesitations as she had once felt the same, questioning what role she could possibly play for the island. "You had over a year with the wizard, though," Mikey had said during her retelling, "and I only have one night." Anne thought a bit before replying. "I learned a great deal from the wizard, and I miss him like he was the father I never had," she replied. "But I learned more about magic in one night than I did in any of his lessons. You'll see what I mean." After watching Anne and the sorcerer jealously, the god of wisdom couldn't take it anymore. He went to the king and wrote a note demanding the writings of the island. The king made a decree that only the god of knowledge could possess written materials so they could control the knowledge. The king took all the wizard's books and writing, leaving the hut mostly bare. The wizard had protested, as controlling knowledge only suppressed it and weakened it. Knowledge comes from sharing and building and questioning each other's ideas. "I have years of knowledge about the crops in there," the wizard had shouted, "and it's not complete yet." "I applaud you for your efforts of getting the crop started," the king said, "but we are abundant in food. We can take it from here, and we have the goddess of plenty." "You know we're short on starfruit seeds," the wizard said. "We have to protect the children." The king scoffed. "My son is healthy," he had said, "and so are all the other kids. Maybe we don't need your starfruits after all." The king and the god of justice left. Anne broke down in tears. Then and now. "They took everything," she said, holding the note like a prized possession. "Except this, which I didn't know existed until you showed up." The king had delivered the book of knowledge to the library, where the god of knowledge devoured it, physically and intellectually, trying to understand it, to decipher it, but he didn't have the spirit of knowledge. He dissected the book instead of looking for the wisdom in the ledgers and the spaces in between. While the god of knowledge learned by taking apart, the wizard learned by putting together. The god's inability to understand at the level of the wizard, even with his writings, began his descent into even more madness. So the creature that descended on Mikey that night wasn't the once curious and tipsy monk, but an insatiable beast. The god of wisdom was frail, but desperate. He bit into Mikey's skin, its teeth drawing blood. His long nails scratched at Mikey's flesh. Mikey punched and swatted and flailed, but he couldn't hit the god well because it was behind him. He ran backwards into a wall, battering the god, slamming him repeatedly until he let go. He flung the god against the bookshelf, knocking it over. Mikey reached for the lamp, and this time he got it, but now the god, his mouth stained with Mikey's blood, was standing between him and the only exit. The god was focused on the lamp instead of Mikey, and Mikey noticed. Mikey put his hand towards the flame, and the god picked up 2 pointed metal pins, and Mikey decided against getting stabbed. There had to be a way out. Just like with the god of justice, he had disturbed the order and was threatening their powers. He looked around at the walls and the books covered in the sorcerer's diagrams, which had become incoherent, and the god's ink blotches. Mikey saw the pot of ink and grabbed it, pouring ink on the flame, but it did nothing. The god gasped and then cackled as the flame repelled the liquid. The flame wasn't of this world, so nothing of this world could put it out. It represented knowledge, and here he was with the god of knowledge in his library. The library. What if... Mikey held the lamp above his head and the god of knowledge flinched. Mikey threw the lamp at the stone wall by the stack of books behind him, and the lamp exploded as the papers went up in flames. The god of knowledge released a guttural scream and, forgetting about Mikey, tried to put out the flames. But they just kept spreading, catching his clothing on fire as well. Mikey made a break for it and ran through the bookshelves to the false bookshelf, which he spun around again. He threw the rod through the hole and crawled after it, and was almost out when a claw grabbed onto his foot. He kicked and jerked until he could reach the metal bar, and slammed the rod back into the hole until he hit the god. As the god recoiled, Mikey slammed the metal door back in place and dropped the metal rod back into the hooks. The god of knowledge banged on the door and then reached out the windows on the side at Mikey before giving up and trying to save some of the books. Mikey looked at the blood on his hands and collected his breath. He walked back down the stone steps, reeling from the encounter. He had teeth marks and scratches all over his body. His shirt had splotches of blood. He had to walk tenderly on the ankle that had been grabbed by the god. His body hurt like a defeat, but he felt some sense of relief from at least a partial victory. He had escaped the god, and hopefully when the books burned up, the flame would have extinguished itself. Anne saw the flame on the hill. She was in the jungle with her bag and Mikey's roller. Through a secret path behind the vines, she entered a cave where the king's contingency ship was waiting. More accurately, it was the ship she'd stolen in her escape from Jamaica and crashed into the island during a storm. Only the king and the guards and the gods knew it was there while he was alive. Even Anne didn't know it had been repaired and stashed. Until later. Anne had found it and stocked it with fresh jars of water, dried fruits and breads, along with some herbs. Now, with their bags on board, they were ready to leave once they defeated the gods. If, a big if, they defeated the gods. Anne made it back to the hut when Mikey was dragging himself along the beach. Mikey didn't know how bad his injuries looked until he got into the light and saw Anne's face. "Wait here," she said, and she muddled with some herbs and rubbed them on the wounds. The pain subsided a bit. "It won't heal anything, but it will get us through the next part," she said. The fire on the hill raged on. "I thought that burning the papers would put out the flame," Mikey said. "We burned up all the writings and forbidden knowledge of the island." Anne pulled out the paper that had been hidden in the wall. "Except this one," she said, running her fingers over the wizard's letters. "It's just the last thing left of him." "We know what it says," Mikey said. "Next is the blood of the innocent." "But not exactly what it means," Anne said. "Blood of the innocent?" Anne's fingers trembled as she held the last loving writing of the only father figure of her life over the flame of the stove. Just before the flame engulfed the paper, it exposed some secret ink. "The sword's blade must not touch the gods," it read. "Leave together." The paper went up in a flash of fire, as did the library on the hill, and then they were both immediately dark, cold ash. The storms around the island began to dissipate, and the skies cleared up. The ocean waters calmed. "We did it," Mikey said. "Part of it," Anne corrected. "But you're saying we have a chance, right?" Mikey said. "Yes," Anne continued, "but as long as those gods are alive, they're not letting us off the island. Especially now that the god of justice is free." "So what now?" Mikey asked. "You kill the gods," Anne said, "and if we survive, we leave."